Me? Okay, see some nods. Okay, great. So yeah, so today, like Tyler said, we're going to give you some of our tips. I mean, I'm definitely not, the end all be all expert. That person is in the conference with us today, Tammy Ray, but she taught me a lot. So and I've been teaching online for a few years, and I just want to point out a few key things related to asynchronous that have really helped me engage with students, and also some things that I learned that actually ended up being a benefit. So if we can go to the next slide, Tyler. So a lot of times, especially right now, I think a lot of people are thinking, online is the lesser form of education. And obviously with the pandemic and having to shift to online, a lot of people are unhappy with that. And I'm definitely going to miss in-person instruction, no doubt. But I want to start off today pointing out two things that are actually benefits to online that can really be utilized. And I really would like you to think about this as you're developing your own courses and going through things this fall, in a more meaningful way. We're a little less in crisis mode. So one of those things has to do with, since in asynchronous, we're talking like discussion boards, things like that. Because of the nature of that, it's actually a great opportunity for students to have time to think and be heard when you're doing a discussion online and you have more time to post. That's a lot different than being on the spot in a classroom, raising your hand, that kind of thing. And that could actually serve equity efforts. I'm going to give you some quotes about that in just a moment. But also instructors can also more easily track formative assessments and student growth. I'm going to give you some examples of that as well. So if we can go to the next slide, Tyler. Thanks. So, I mentioned this idea of, a possibility of equity in online classes. And I say possibility because it's not just that we're teaching online, so all of a sudden all of our classes are going to be equitable and, get rid of all those systemic barriers. I'm not saying that, of course. But this article that I found, African-American Males Learning Online, Promoting Academic Achievement in Higher Education, there were two particular quotes that I found particularly relevant for our discussion today. And one of them, and this was all based on surveys of African-American male students, as the title would suggest, at various colleges and universities. And one finding said that 40% of the participants indicated they felt online learning created a non-prejudicial learning environment. And when asked about that, one student said, it's an open forum where everyone has the opportunity to say what they want to say. In the classroom, you may not get picked. That's being honest. In online classes, everyone has the same access. I hate to talk about all that kind of stuff, race and that, but I see fewer people of color raising their hands because I already know that it's not going to happen. And then he goes on, in online, that's less of a concern. And I think we know that, right? That there's, depending on the situation, there's, prejudices that go into play of, expectations of certain students that play out with who gets called on. But I thought this was a really interesting perspective, how, everybody has, a little more equal access to being heard. And we all know the students who, even for other reasons, maybe don't want to talk during class, that introversion, but this is a really, great opportunity if you take it to engage with more of your students. And then if we go to the next slide. Some participants also preferred online courses because they were less competitive, indicated by statements such as, I'm not good at speaking in front of people. Online format works for me because there's less competition and less pressure. It's not time limited, so I can sit back and think before saying why I feel a certain way about a topic. And same thing, in online class, I go my own pace, no pressure to worry about who's finishing first. You take a test in class, people look around, see who's finished first. Online, it's my own pace. So I think this is another really interesting perspective of, obviously we lose something from not being in a classroom with everybody, but there's also these things we can gain. And I think, I really encourage you to think about that from your students' perspective and what they can gain from you doing these asynchronous activities. So if we go ahead, Tyler, to the next slide. When I set up my discussion boards, because to me that's the primary piece of asynchronous learning, there's obviously other components as well, but for me, and this is not the only way to do it, but for me, I set it up as a weekly plan, and I give the students various activities to complete. Some discussion boards, some of them are writing prompts, some of them are maybe online activities. It just depends. It's a mix. I usually give around 10 activities per week. And, I go through and I think about how long will it take them to complete all this? Is this the equivalent of meeting, 150 minutes per week plus, homework time, as best an estimate as possible, right? So I set it up and say, okay, in this week, here's what you're going to accomplish. So Tyler, if you go to the next slide. So for me, discussion boards can accomplish a lot of different goals based on how they're set up. So one thing I use discussion boards for, and this is just an example, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it's to spark class discussion, right? Because once again, you're not, asynchronously, you're not all together, you're not sitting there able to, go back and forth as, organically as a spoken conversation, but you can still have similar things going on in the discussion boards. So something like this would be the beginning of an essay unit I do, where they're going to research, some kind of social science or phenomenon. So I get them just starting about, what are some questions you have? And this is an activity I do in class. I just then translated it into a discussion board post. I basically say, pose a question you have, an honest question, something you legitimately don't know the answer to. I give the example, as you can see, and this is a real question I have. Apparently for The Bachelor, the show, I don't know if anybody watches it. I don't, but some of my colleagues do, and apparently there are fantasy leagues where you can bet on who's going to be chosen. so I give that to the students as like, why do these exist, right? What are these about? And then, it's kind of a fun example, but then, like I said, this is posting, starting a discussion. They're responding to each other, as you see, thoughtfully responding. Angelika is going to talk more about the response piece, but I found this is a really good way to get people asking their own stuff and then talking to each other, similar to what we would do in class. So next slide, Tyler. Another thing that I use discussion boards for is skill development, right? In class, I'm going to have the students, practice certain things, right? So for this is from an essay, for my own class, where they have to write an essay about some news story from the year they were born, right? So somewhat recent history, but something they don't have firsthand knowledge about because they were a baby. But to practice that longer example, I give them just a short, like a paragraph writing assignment here to practice in class. Once again, I do that online, and I have them post it here in a discussion board, because then they're seeing how other people are doing it, how others approached it. They can learn from each other. But it's that same kind of skill development as if I was having them practice in class. So that's another reason I would use a discussion board. And then if we go to the next slide. Formative assessments, I mentioned this at the beginning, right? So, these are those smaller activities we do to, to test, to see how the students are doing with certain skills. And I have found I'm much better able to do this in an online class than I can in an in-person class. Because, like this is an example where I'm having the student practice writing a thesis statement, right? I say, watch this video, write details, the instructional piece, but then write your own. And I do that in class too, but when you do those kinds of formative assessments in class, certain students work faster than others, as we know, right? Some will get done in 30 seconds and be good to go. Some will take, 5 minutes. For some activities, it's a difference between 10-minute completion and a half hour. And then you have to have those other activities for other students to move on to. And, obviously you do it, but I found that online really helps me say, you spend as much time as you need, I can respond. And it's also not an issue of I'm not going to run out of time to respond. Sometimes in class, it's like, oh, I haven't gotten to 5 people to conference with them. Here, that's not an issue. I can conference when they're done, right? So, and also it's all written, it's all collected. I don't have to have like a spreadsheet where I'm tracking, okay, how well did this student do with this activity? Are they getting better? Are they not growing? It's all on D12. I can always go back to it, which is a really helpful tool there. So Tyler, if we go to the next slide. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to turn it over to Angelika, is considerations when creating your discussion prompts. So one thing to consider is, are you going to have your responses to other students required or optional? Some of my discussion board posts, I say you have to respond to at least 2 students, right? Thoughtful, and like I said, Angelika is going to talk more about that. Or sometimes it's optional, right? Sometimes it's a discussion post where it's more of that skill development that everybody's kind of doing the same thing, maybe like an MLA, citation thing. You don't need to comment on somebody else's works cited entry, but it's helpful to see other people's stuff. And I say you can respond, but something like that, I'm not really looking for a big discussion, as opposed to some I definitely am, and I want them to really be engaging with each other. So that's one thing to consider when you're developing your discussion questions. 2, instruct a response as you go or afterward. I remember in grad school, some of the best advice I got from my advisor, when I was starting teaching, was don't have everything a student says followed by you saying something, right? So if a student answers a question, don't then rephrase it or put it in your own words every single time, right? Because then it just turns into a student you, back and forth. And that's a challenge, right? For me not to do that. I really, I try not to do it in class, and I definitely try to do it online. So there are some discussion posts that, yeah, I'm responding as we go. I'm keeping the conversation going as well as the students are. But some I hold back, especially if the students are responding. I like to give them some time to actually do their responses before I've responded. Because if I respond to somebody's post right away, within an hour of them posting it, then it leaves less room for the students to necessarily respond to each other, or, they maybe are limited in what they can say based on what I've said. So, you got to find that balance, for sure. Another one, must post first or see other posts first. You can set it so a student cannot do their own post, or they have to do their own post before they can see anybody others. If I'm asking them to do something that all the other students are doing about the same topic, maybe responding to a reading, I like to say, you know what, you have to post first, because then there's, you're not just going to look at what other people said, see their summary, and kind of regurgitate the same ideas. If it's something about a different kind of topic, like that honest question thing I posted, where they're all going to be posting different things, I let them see other students post first, because then that may give them an idea, especially if they're like, I don't really know how to approach this. I don't really know what he's asking for. Seeing a few examples could be helpful. So, just consider that. And then finally, there's some times where, even for formative assessments, it's better to just use a Dropbox. If I'm having them write something that's a little more extend, and I want to give them more detailed feedback that's related to the quality of the work, to the point where I'm concerned that, privacy issues, then just do a Dropbox, right? Even for formative assessments, not the discussion board. Always think about other students may not read it, but if it's on a discussion board, it's obviously public. So just something to consider there. And that, depending on your subject, depending on your daily topics, that's what you need to, find the balance of. But those are considerations that I always take into mind. Okay, so if we want to go ahead and shift on.
Hello, so let's continue with the responses. One of the things that I usually do for my students is I allow them a whole week. And the reason that I do that is because I really do want them to take the time to research the subject that they're going to talk about and write about, but also I don't want them to feel rushed. There's really no reason. It just allows them to have a little bit more time to post. One of the things that I do ask the students is that they don't only consider their own topic and concentrate just because they research this topic. I don't want them to continue reading the post on the same topic that the other students already posted. I do want them to expose themselves to some of the other topics. I usually have minimum of 3. I've had discussion boards when I had about 12 different topics. So that's a really good opportunity for students to actually learn a little bit about something that their peers already researched as well. And that's why it's underlined, make sure that you choose a different topic that you're going to respond to kind of open up your horizons a little bit more. I also allow the students to actually work together in groups. This really does depend on which class I teach. I do have 2 cohorts of students. The first cohort is my junior class. These are students who are not even in clinicals just yet. I teach radiography. So those students don't know each other very well. They're in the beginning of getting to know each other as they're going to be working together for 6 semesters together in a cohort. So they might not have formed relationships just yet. So I do encourage them. I actually have in my patient care class a team of 2 students, and they do a wonderful job at researching everything. They go an extra mile and actually use outside resources, which I really appreciate that they do it. I feel that this is almost like that scaffolding where they're not really expected to do the research yet until the second year, but they're already kind of trying to do it, which is really appreciated. And all of the other students really appreciate their posts, and they're the most popular posts. Everybody reads them, and they feel like this is something that, they can follow in the steps of that team of 2 students that usually do it. And I know Ryan talked already a little bit about how you want to respond to those posts. And I agree. I think it's very important that the instructor doesn't take over the whole discussion board. I think that there is validity in allowing the students to form their own responses. I feel that if I jump in too early into the discussion, it's almost like everybody else will consider that whatever I posted is the correct answer. And I don't want to have that. I want the students to, do it on their own. One of the things that I also do is, especially in the beginning, I want to get the students started. So I am much more responsive, I guess, in the very first couple weeks, and I participate in the discussion board much more often. And I feel that that allows the students to kind of realize what the expectation is of that. It kind of models at first what is an appropriate response to somebody else's post. And then as the semester continues, I tend not to really participate as much as in the beginning, as the students already have an idea of what is appropriate. One of the things that I do in the discussion posts, and I sometimes also do it in the feedback that I give to the students as I'm grading their discussion posts, I always give them feedback. And in that feedback, I can be a little bit more direct because I know it's not posted on a public forum, and then I can make some suggestions if a student may be, it's more of a objective feedback. If a student maybe made a mistake in their post, I can correct it. One of the most common mistakes that students make in the very first semester is calling our profession technicians, X-ray technicians. We're radiologic technologists, and this is a really big thing. And so I have an opportunity to kind of correct it and say, this is not how you're supposed to do it, and it's not shaming the students in the public forum. Another thing that I always try to do is, especially if a student maybe had some difficulties researching the topic, I will go ahead and insert a link into the discussion post, or maybe even a video. And this is really nice. There's a couple different ways that you can insert things right into the discussion post or right into the feedback. You can attach a link, you can attach a video. One specific example that I did for one of the students, this is for my second year students in ethics class. There was a discussion about a patient who went through surgery because the ultrasound failed to show that she was 5 weeks pregnant. She ended up losing the baby because of the anesthesia, and therefore was suing the physician for not being able to see that she was in fact pregnant. And the student had really battled with this, weren't really sure which side to pick, who was right, the patient or the physicians. So I ended up just researching really quickly what a 5-week pregnancy looks like, and then posting the picture of the actual ultrasound image, showing that in fact you can see it. So that was one of the ways that you can actually teach the student after they've already posted. Tyler, could you please advance to the next slide? How do we grade discussions? I think that some of the most important things for me, at least in my classes, is for the students to be proficient in the subject and the field, especially since it's a medical field and it's very important that students are knowledgeable and they know what it is that they're talking about. So for me, it's very important that they actually research and that they post facts and not their opinions. So I do grade the students. I do welcome their personal opinions. I like that the students can sometimes apply from their stories, what they're learning, but I also value a little bit more that they actually stick to the facts. So that's how they can get a better grade if they do. And then the second thing that I value is that participation in community of learning. Students are learning from one another. And so I also assign grades to those students who listen to the instructions and actually do post on more than one post, 2 posts or more. So this is just a very, very simple rubric. It doesn't have to have so many items. It really depends on what it is that you value, what it is that you're trying to get the students to learn from the discussion boards. Tyler, could you please advance? Okay, so we will take a little bit of time and actually go into breakout sessions. And I think that, how many people are there gonna be? About 4 or 5 people per breakout room?
Yeah, so we'll set it up to likely about 4 or 5 people per breakout room. And if you're new to breakout discussions, what that'll be is I'll set everything up on my end to put you in groups of 4 or 5. It'll be a Zoom meeting just like this one, except 4 or 5 people you'll be talking with. For that, I do encourage you, please unmute your microphone if you're willing to, and at a good place to share your video. I encourage you to do that as well. We'll be in those breakout discussions for about 10 minutes. I'll set it up for, and then we'll automatically come back here to discuss what comes up. The questions to talk about in the breakout discussions, one is just sharing what has been your experience so far with creating and facilitating online discussion boards for your classes. So what have you done so far? Have you had positive experiences, negative experiences? What has it been like for you so far in your classes? The second piece to bring up is for planning for the fall. Think about one sort of skill or particular topic, one element you teach in your course, and think about some of the different variables and questions that Angelika and Ryan brought up. So will you make responses to other students required or optional? Or are you going to be responding throughout the discussion or just at the end with some sort of summary? Do they have to post first before they see other people? So what kind of variables to you, based off your subject area, based off your class, seem most helpful to use the discussion boards? And right now I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing screen, and I'll put you all in groups of, again, 4 to 5. I'll send those questions as a message to the group, so you don't have to exactly have written all that down. You'll have those in front of you. One quick word of advice as you enter those small groups: if you would at the beginning just nominate somebody, or somebody be willing to say, hey, I'll kind of keep us on track, I'll help us get through the questions, and if somebody isn't getting a chance to talk, I'll be the one to try and bring them into the conversation if they're willing. So I'm going to set up those groups on my end, and then you should be whisked away in just a moment to discussion groups.
Okay, so let's talk about students' collaboration. I think this is really important. You know, we're talking about that, building that community of learning with students. And so I think that it's very important. I think that it can be very difficult. In our little breakout session, we were talking about, you know, students being vulnerable and not really open to share some of their experiences and things like that. And so asking students to work on a project together is a very, very good way to actually let them get to know each other. I also encourage the students to not only use D2L online learning as the exclusive way to connect to one another. There are so many different ways that students can, you know, very quickly communicate with one another. I recently asked my senior group of students to add me to their GroupMe chat. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that. I wasn't. This was something new. So basically you text something and everybody gets it. And then you can also, you know, love it or, you know, whatnot. So so this is really nice. I know that students sometimes communicate on Snapchat, on Facebook Messenger, depending on where they are. I encourage them to actually form those relationships. You know, it can be very difficult to be a student in a cohort, in a program that is difficult, such as, you know, healthcare course, or, you know, and so I think that students need to understand that they're in it together, you know, and that they have one another as a support. Sometimes, you know, for students, they can think that they're the only ones who think that this is difficult, and talking to one another and realizing that everybody's on the same boat can help them persevere and not give up in a program. Google Docs can be a really good way for you to assign some of the projects that they can do. And actually, Ryan and I, and Tyler, we were working on a Google Doc for this presentation. And you can see the little icon of the person, so you know that they're in there right now at the same time. And if you're not familiar with Google Docs, which I really wasn't using that too much in the past, I'm very new to it, but I know a lot of the seniors who are coming back from, or who are, a lot of the high school seniors who are just starting classes at ECC, that's pretty much all that they've been using in high school. So they can be very familiar with Google Docs. Tyler, next slide, please. I just recently discovered D2L group discussions. I was able to watch a little tutorial that took me through all of the steps on how to set it up. And in D2L, it's really nice because you can actually have different discussions, or you can have the same discussion, but you almost force the students to work in groups if that's what you choose to do. And so on the next slide, Tyler, if you can show the kind of visual. So basically what it looks like, you can set up whatever it is that you would like the students to do, and then 4 students at a time, or 5 students, or however many, depending on the size of your class, they can collaborate together. One other thing that you can also do is there is an option for a Dropbox and also a locker. So if you would like the students to use the discussion group to communicate about a project, that can be done, but also they can maybe have a paper or a Google Doc, and you can ask them to actually drop it into the Dropbox so they can grade it later on. So that's one of the ways. If you can go back one slide, Tyler, please. So this is basically the prompt that I do use, and I want to make sure that that they understand that they have to work together. So I ask the students to have everybody participate, because everybody is going to share the same grade. And that way, I feel like people might be more prone to actually making sure that their voice is heard, so that they're working towards the quality of this particular assignment that they're working on together. I think that's all. And I think this is Ryan's.
Yep, thanks, Angelika. So, you know, along with that collaborative piece, for me, that really comes into play with peer review, right? You know, once again, thinking about in terms of, you know, in person, right? Every student brings in a copy of their essay. You know, we read it, we give feedback. You know, I'm giving feedback, conferencing, that kind of thing. That is just so easy to do in person in some regards, and it also helps solve the problem of if somebody doesn't have a draft ready, it's very obvious, like, okay, well, class started, you don't have a draft, you know, you need to go work on that, you need to get caught up. With online, we get the benefit of you have longer, so it's not like, okay, one student, you know, is done responding to their peer in 15 minutes, another one after 15 minutes is only halfway through. You know, you're at home, you know, on your own time, you take the time you need. But one challenge I face is those timely submissions, right? So if I'm saying post your draft by, you know, midnight on Sunday, and then Monday I'm going to assign groups, well, if there's if there's people who didn't have theirs done right then, but then they, you know, Tuesday or even Monday afternoon say, oh, now I have it, right? It's a little difficult, obviously, to get everybody on the same page. But to me, the bigger concern, because with that, okay, you missed it, you missed the deadline, you're going to have to do some kind of alternative way to get feedback. But the missing responses is the part that I really struggle with, and is, you know, frustrating for the students, because, you know, you send somebody, you know, you're in a group, this person's supposed to be responding to my essay, give me feedback, and they don't do it, right? Once again, in class, I'm only going to put you in a group if you're there. I know you're going to do it. If you submit a draft, but then that week, for whatever reason, you just don't get around to it, you choose not to, or you don't have time, whatever, you know, it's a little more challenging, and, you know, you don't have a crystal ball of who's gonna miss that. So some strategies, and this is not perfect, and I'm still always working to improve this piece, is one, to have big enough groups. So, you know, if you have 4 people in a group, and, you know, 1 or even 2, hopefully not, but even 2 don't respond, you know, other people still got response from somebody else. Reminders, that's a big thing with online learning, right? Send those reminders, you know, and there's a lot of apps, you know, Angelika mentioned a lot of good ones for collaboration. You know, you can obviously send reminders through the email, but as we know, a lot of students don't check their student email, or they don't send it enough. But app-wise, there's the Remind app, right, where you can have the students sign up to get a text message. that's something that's good in general to communicate with them, those reminders that they'll see. Making it part of requirements for the peer review. It's one of those things of if they have to do the peer review or these other activities, I do this with discussion questions too. If you have to do it to be able to turn in your assignment, right? If it's part of the module saying it's a required activity, that's going to push them to make sure they focus on it and get it done. But then finally, for me, it's having that feedback from me as well. I wait. Usually what I do is, if the essay is due on Sunday night, I say, please have your feedback done by Thursday. That gives the student who wrote it time to use your feedback on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, before they turn in the final draft, right, in that week turnaround. But I also give my feedback, but I usually wait until like Thursday, right, so that they're not just looking at my feedback and then saying, okay, I don't need to read my fellow peers. Part of it is also I usually procrastinate until around Thursday, so it's not all good design. It's a practical thing too, but it is beneficial, obviously. Same with the discussion boards of if you're just constantly giving your feedback, what's the point of the collaboration, right? In a lot of students' mind, even though there's obviously value they can get from the students as well. So we want to, encourage that. So like I said, that's not perfect. I've not mastered online asynchronous peer review, but I'm actually glad that I did this workshop with Angelika, because a lot of the stuff she was talking about in our planning, I was like, oh, I'm totally going to do that. So there's things you can do and work towards it, and find what works for your own classes. Depending on what your projects are, what your collaboration is, it's going to be different. But those are some things that I would recommend considering in the asynchronous method. Okay.
Okay, so we're going to stop sharing at this point. So we have a bit of time for questions that have come up throughout. And so what I would encourage you to think about with this remaining time is questions that came up in the small group discussion that you think, hey, here's definitely one to post to the group and sort of see what people are thinking, or post directly to Angelika or Ryan. Questions that have come up certainly through what Ryan and Angelika have shared that you want to kind of touch on a little bit more. Additionally, I would say if somebody in your group shared what you think was a really helpful suggestion, feel free to maybe prompt them or kind of say, hey, Meg had this really good suggestion. Here's what she mentioned, and kind of go from there. To get things started, one question I do want to bring up, somebody posted in the chat earlier about what to do with students and potentially plagiarizing posts, or if students do plagiarize a post. And Ryan, you shared a response, if you would, to maybe just kind of talk to that a little bit to the group.
For which one? I'm sorry, I was reading the chat.
Yep, so there's a question about what to do with students plagiarizing posts.
Oh, sure, yeah, I responded that. For me, I like to always, give the student the benefit of the doubt. I would assume that in a lot of cases, somebody is plagiarizing something in a discussion board. It's maybe because they didn't take it, as seriously as, say, a formal essay or a formal test. Maybe thinking, oh, well, because it's one of those things. As we all know, you go online on various websites, plagiarism is so rampant. You'll see the same description on, Wikipedia, WebMD, all these different websites. So, like I said, giving them the benefit of the doubt, may not know that, no, this should be as serious as something else. So I would definitely do private email. I wouldn't in the discussion board say this is plagiarized, redo it, for obvious reasons. But let them know of, you really need to make sure you're still using the same academic integrity with the discussion board as you would anything else. You're writing it, your name's on it. So if you want to use a source, quote it, right? Just like you would anything else in an essay. So that piece of being serious and point out that that's not okay, but definitely on that personal level, not a public shaming, anything like that. Public shaming is not good for education, right, as we know. So that's my view on that.
Before I bring up a couple other questions, one quick plug. So there is going to be a CETL workshop next Wednesday at 1 p.m. on sort of academic integrity issues with online learning. That's being led by Kellen Bolt from English, Abby Bailey from Math, John Long from Student Services and Judicial Affairs, and myself. So please register for that. Be there. We'll get into a lot more depth about sort of ways to equitably think about supporting students' academic integrity questions. A few more questions come up in the chat to bring up. One good, real good question is, what is the most efficient way to grade discussion boards? I think with the focus there on efficiency. Ryan or Angelika want to speak to that, or others?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I have been playing with that one a little bit. And I found for me, the most efficient way is actually to grade it straight from the gradebook. There's a little icon that shows up next to the student's name, and then that opens up a separate screen. And that way I can see not only the student's post, but I can also see the posts or the replies that they've made to their classmates. It also shows up with my rubric. I have attached rubric to every single discussion post. And from there, I am actually able to go ahead and give the students points, and I have a little window for feedback where I can just type in. And that way I don't get tangled into all of the discussion, it's just so much easier for me that way, just from a separate window.
I would just also add to that. I agree, Angelika, but I'd also say you can, in your discussion board in D2L, the other option would be very similar to what Angelika's talking about. You can set up in the assessment tab, you can tie it to a grade item. So again, strictly or straight from the discussion board area, you can do view or assess topic, and then you can see each student individually with all of their participation within that discussion, and you have your window to add comments, your area to add points. And if you use a rubric, you can attach the rubric to the discussion board as well.
Thank you, Tammy. Oh, real quick before Tyler, if you want to go to the next question, but one thing that came up with us was how to do the students must post first. When you're creating your discussion board, it's actually really easy. When you're typing in the description and the title and everything, there's a little checkbox that says must post first. So super easy to do that.
One really good question too related to group work. That's a good question for online, face-to-face, anything. And I'm still on the idea of sort of students doing group posts. That's actually new to me. I really like that idea in a lot of ways. The question is, do people assign students to groups or allow students to form their own groups? There's a lot of, I think, really good thinking on this. But Ryan, Angelika, do one of you want to respond first on what you've done in the past?
Like I said, I am very new to this also. I just discovered it by just looking at things, and I don't know. I think that there is an option. I think Tammy is probably the better person to speak about it. I think that you can force the students to sign onto it if they haven't done it already. That's my understanding. But Tammy, you're welcome to chime in.
You can, I'm not sure what you're referencing when you say force to sign in, but as far as creating the groups, D2L allows you to assign students to a group, to let them choose their groups, or you can randomly create groups. I think that answered the question. If not, ask again.
Ryan, did you have thoughts on how you sort of form student groups or allow students to form their groups?
Well, I mean, just going back to the peer review piece, yeah, I usually assign it, and that's a practical piece based on who has the assignment done, and also then I like to mix it up, right? Because I don't want everybody just gravitating to the same people when we're doing it throughout the course of the semester. I can definitely see the benefit of if it's a bigger project, letting there be choice. For sure, I see the benefit there. But yeah, in terms of my smaller activities, I do like to just group people so that there is a purpose to it. There is something driving that in terms of, mixing it up, having different perspectives, but then also, the balance of, student ability, right, can be beneficial there, so especially for something like I'm doing. So I usually do pick myself.
Yeah. I would encourage as a fallback as a beginning to pick the groups for students rather than allowing complete student choice, especially in an online environment in terms of students just not having certain connections to each other, but in face-to-face as well. I think setting up the groups yourself allows to cut through a lot of potential problems. And additionally, I would say go a step further as well. With bigger group projects, you see students take on particular roles within the group in terms of like, hey, note-taking, leading, reporting back. I would encourage you to assign those roles to students as well and be conscious of rotating those roles. There's a lot of really compelling research about different sort of gender and racial biases that come out with sort of what role students are assigned based off of perceptions of them. And so as the instructor, you have a lot of opportunity to assign those roles to kind of cut through any of those perceptions or expectations, and to assign roles or to rotate those roles as well. So I'd encourage you to do that as a good starting point when forming groups.
Well, and Tyler, thank you for saying all that. And that's kind of what I was going for at the beginning, where there's a great potential for equity, but it's not just magical, like, hey, we're online, racial and gender bias and all that's, not here. That can absolutely play out. So having, that direction, I think, can really help mitigate that stuff and create that more in welcoming environment. So I'm glad you brought that up, Tyler.
And I just wanted to add one thing from the discussion board. Somebody asked if we set up groups in D2L from the virtual classroom. And I think that the reason that we don't do it is because that's mostly done in Synchronous, which obviously has benefits, because then you can just get the students into, groups just like we did in breakout session on Zoom. You can also do breakout rooms in virtual classroom. And that would be the benefit of students being able to talk face-to-face without the need to collaborate, because in asynchronous, we don't have that opportunity for students to be together in real time. Hope that answers your question.
Tyler, can I add something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just as it's all bumping around in our brain, we've talked a lot about when you want to respond to student posts versus letting the students, respond to each other, and that's super important. But I don't want you to take that as, so you really don't need to be reading the responses. I would encourage you to be reading the responses from the students pretty regularly. I mean, I'm not saying you have to, do it every single day over the week, constantly or anything like that. But I mean, pretty regularly, because for two reasons. One, if you have hundreds of posts to read on, Monday morning, your life will be miserable. So there's the practical piece, but also with that whole, student environment piece online, if there are issues with students starting to troll each other or say things that are hostile, you want to be able to address that right away. I mean, I had a case a few years ago where two students got into an argument that was kind of nasty, and they only started it the day before by the time I was reading the post. So it's not like I let it fester for too long, but I mean, these things can pop up, and, because the classroom is going on all the time in asynchronous, like I said, don't tie yourself to your computer or anything like that, but it's good to keep up with those posts regularly, just so both you keep up with the conversation, what students are posting, but then also in case there are issues, you're ready to step in and take care of that as need be. Because that's a concern. It doesn't happen constantly, but it definitely has the potential to happen regularly. So just something to be concerned with. So just something I wanted to share.
Okay, so we're close to about out of time here. So what I'll mention is thank you very, very much to Ryan. Thank you very, very much to Angelika for putting this together and leading this session. Your thoughts, resources are very, very much appreciated. I'll certainly follow up to the group, to everybody here, probably by about Monday with the slides that were covered here, some of the resources as well. So if you are brand new to creating discussion boards on D2L or different platforms, I'll have some resources there. If folks have particular questions, particular concerns that came up, they maybe weren't comfortable posting to the full group, I'm going to stick around the Zoom call for about 15, 20 minutes. Absolutely feel free to stick around, ask particular questions of me. I would say probably welcome to follow up with Ryan and Angelika as well with questions. Yeah. And thank you again very much for being here. Hopefully this was helpful. I'll send some resources to follow up soon. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Tyler, can I quickly answer Ginger's question that she had in the discussion chat about grades?
Yeah, please do, yeah.
With groups, and I don't know if Ginger is still here, but you do have the option when you set up groups to give the same grade to all members of the group, or an option to set up a grade for individual members of the group. So you can, like, say if you have a discussion board assignment, you can grade the assignment and all group members get the same grade, or if you want to give individual grades, set it up in the grades area. So I hope that answered the question.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tammy. So as I mentioned, feel free to stick around if there are more questions. If not, feel free to take off. Enjoy your Thursday. I'll be here for a bit to kind of keep talking.
Real quick, Tyler, is this going to be available for people who weren't in the session? Is this going to be on like the CETL page?
It is indeed, yes. I'm going to stop recording now.